Hello, everyone. Thank you for taking the time to join us for the QuerySurge webinar. My name is Laura Poggi, and I am the Marketing Manager here at RTTS. Presenting today is Ray Mandaro, the QuerySurge Product Manager, and Jeff Picardsley, the Senior Architect, will be answering your questions at the conclusion of the webinar. We'll be taking all questions over chat, so please feel free to send them in at any point throughout the session. Also, if there are any issues seeing or hearing the presentation, please use chat to alert the host. And thank you again for your time and participation. Now I'll hand it over to Ray to begin the presentation.
Thank you, Laura. Good afternoon, everyone. Thank you for your time and for your interest in QuerySurge. My name is Ray Mandaro. I'm the QuerySurge Product Manager. We'll be starting off today with a brief slide presentation just to provide an overview of the application and some context behind what the tool does and what the tool can be used for. And then we'll dive a little bit deeper into a demo of the application and the different modules of the QuerySurge workflow. Where I'd like to start off initially is by just identifying and defining some of the challenges we saw with QuerySurge. And ultimately, the number one goal for QuerySurge is to find bad data. How do we root out bad data in a large volume data warehouse? This can obviously be a challenging initiative with the size and the complexity of today's data warehouses. There's not many solutions out there that can scale to provide the type of functionality and data coverage that's needed in today's organization. So one of the things that we'll speak about is exactly how we go about finding bad data within QuerySurge and within the application and the type of information that we display from a failing data perspective. Another huge challenge for organizations out there is testing data across different platforms. There's a lot of variety of technology that can be used and implemented within a data warehouse. One of the things that we do pretty well with QuerySurge is we make that process seamless to compare data and analyze data from different technologies, from different relational databases, and even from different flat file formats, either coming from different source systems or mainframe systems. So we have tons of functionality within the tool to provide coverage across different platforms and a seamless analysis of data between those multiple sources. Also, one of the large challenges is automating the testing effort. So with the volume of data that exists in today's data warehouses, manual efforts often just are unable to cut it in terms of the amount of coverage that is ideal for this type of work. So how do we automate the testing process all the way from kicking off tests to running a unit test or regression and keeping the team informed with the information and the analytics and the health of the data within the data warehouse. We'll dive pretty deep into that process and the different pieces of functionality that we support to give you a really good overview of how this type of tool can fit into your organization. From a process and data review perspective, the type of challenges we solve for a data analyst is now that the data is in the QuerySurge repository, how do we actually approve the workflows and the testing and validate whether or not our efforts were testing the data according to the specifications of the ETL and to the business requirements that were implemented from a development perspective. So there's tons of functionality from that perspective as well. And most importantly, once these platforms are in existence, how do we monitor the data warehouse health on a continuous basis? How do I monitor my data warehouse daily or even hourly? So we have functionality in the tool to help from an operations perspective to accomplish some of those initiatives and solve the challenges that we've discussed here. Just a quick overview of the product history and where exactly QuerySurge came from. In terms of the origin, RTTS is professional services and software organization. We've been around since 1996. As an organization, we work with several different Fortune 500 organizations, and more importantly, where QuerySurge came about was for a large pharmaceutical organization for the Fortune Top 50, and we were brought on to do their data warehouse work and ETL testing. And at the time that we were brought in several years ago, there wasn't much in place to leverage any type of existing technology to tackle the scope of the challenge of the amount of data that had to be tested and validated. This was specifically for a data warehouse implementation. We have a team of experts here that are dedicated to this type of work. And for the last several years, we've been working with customers around the world to solve their challenges. some of the requirements that we needed in the tool that we started building ourselves was that it definitely had to be automated. Manual efforts could not cover the amount of data that we were looking for and that the requirements from our clients. Scalability was a serious concern. We had some homegrown utilities that were built to leverage some of the existing automation tools in the space, and unfortunately, with the volumes of data that we were challenged to cover and to test and validate, those solutions didn't scale to meet our requirements. So we were forced to really think a little bit outside the box of how we can accomplish this sort of challenge in terms of scalability and increased coverage with an automated solution. And what we came up with is what you're going to see today in QuerySurge. It's optimized and it's a cross-platform analysis. It has a distributed architecture and event-driven scheduling and execution. And these are three of the most important things that we were able to implement in the product with working with our own use of the tool and also with our existing customers as well to really make this process of data analysis and data testing and locating, identifying bad data in your data warehouse environment a really seamless process and effortless from certain perspectives as well. So we'll dig deep into the functionality of how this solution works. In terms of roles and target audience, QuerySurge is definitely a great for the ETL development team. It's a workbench for those developers to do their day in and day out work of unit testing and smoke testing their initiatives in terms of translating business requirements and ETL mapping documentation into workable code that brings back the data that they're expecting. From a QA team perspective, QuerySurge can be used as a framework to really implement a strong regression and testing process within your organization. From a data analysis team perspective, QuerySurge can be used as an information portal to really understand the data in your environment and understand whether or not your requirements are being met according to specifications. And from an operations team perspective, QuerySurge is a platform for monitoring the health of your organization and the health of the data specifically within your data warehouse environment. In terms of the application workflow, QuerySurge is separated into 5 different modules. The workflow begins within the design library. This is where either your testers or your ETL developers will create and edit their tests and also create what we call a reusable query snippet, and we'll get into the details of exactly what that refers to. The next step of the process is scheduling. There's a few different ways to schedule your tests. There's an event-based trigger execution model that's in place and also time-based, so there's some flexibility there as well. Once you've scheduled your test in the form of a test suite, you can monitor the results real-time via our Runtime Dashboard. This is where you can see actually all the data that's being loaded into the QuerySurge repository and any failing data that may be important to your team for collaboration purposes. There's a reporting module that really lets you and allows management and the folks that are interested with a high-level overview of the results and outcome of your scheduling and scenario execution efforts to understand the information that QuerySurge is providing in a clean and thorough fashion in terms of the analysis of the data that was compared during runtime. And also, as you can imagine, there's lots of data accumulating within QuerySurge. So there's a facility within the administration module to handle this accordingly, along with some wizards to connect to your data sources with ease. So we'll cover all these in detail in the upcoming demo. So right now I'm going to toggle over to the QuerySurge application, and we'll dig deep into the functionality of each of the specific modules. Just give me 1 second, please, to share my application. Okay, great. So what you're looking at right now is the welcome screen of the QuerySurge application. Just from a technology perspective, QuerySurge is a web-based application that's installed in your environment. So if you were to share QuerySurge among your different teams, each team member will be logging in to QuerySurge via their browser on their desktop. So what you're looking at right now is the QuerySurge welcome screen. It outlines the modules that we've discussed and also gives a brief view of the ongoing activity in the application. If I can direct your attention to the left side of the screen, you'll see that there is a user-defined hierarchy of folders to organize the different tests and what we call query pairs within the application. And if I drill down into a specific folder, what you'll see here is a list of all query pairs that exist in the library that have been designed thus far. If I were to drill down into a query pair, this is the basis and the core asset of execution within the application. And the idea here is to define a source connection that you can see by this drop-down right here, and a target connection. And these two connections are user-defined. They can represent any leg of your ETL architecture. So, for example, if you have source data coming in from flat files, or if you have source data coming in from an Oracle database, that can be defined as your source. And if your target in the data warehouse or some sort of staging environment is of a different technology, that can be defined here as well. And the goal for a query pair is to find two queries that will bring back an analogous result set of data that QuerySurge will load into its repository and analyze for any type of data failures or inconsistencies with the data that was defined. In terms of compatibility with data sources, you'll notice here that there's a pretty long list of different technologies that are supported. These technologies are supported out of the box, meaning the connection process to connect to these technologies is provided by QuerySurge, and all the drivers needed for that are bundled within the product. If there was a type of technology that you do not see in this list, we have the ability to create a custom connector that we have done for a variety of existing customers thus far. For example, maybe you have a proprietary flat file format coming from a mainframe system. We definitely support that type of data as well for analysis, as well as the bundled technologies that you see in the drop-down list here. Once you have your query defined, the next step of the process is to toggle over to the design time run. And this is where you can validate that the data that's being returned by your source and target query is returning the results that you're expecting. If I were to run this specific query pair again, you'll get a good idea of the information that we provide from a design time run perspective. While this is executing quickly, I want to also provide some insight in regards to any type of limitations in the queries that can be defined in terms of a source and target query. We support any type of syntax that's supported by the technology that you're looking to connect to. So, for example, multi-statement queries and SQL statements can be executed. Store procedures and functions can be called from within a query pair. Temporary tables can be created, or views can be selected from and used for analysis. So there's really no limitations that we impose from a QuerySurge perspective on the type of syntax and code that you can execute via a query pair. This design time run has completed. You'll see that it has a failing status here. This is a relatively small example for demonstration purposes, but you'll see that on the source row count is 6,493 rows with an equivalent amount of data coming back on the target system. You also see that there were seven failed rows from this data set, resulting in a failed outcome. You'll see some high-level metadata associated to the run, but more importantly, you can drill down into the individual result sets that were returned by the query pair. The first tab here is indicated by the left green pointing arrow is all of the source data. The second tab, indicated by the right blue pointing arrow, is all of the target data. The third tab is the failing data that was analyzed by QuerySurge. So just in terms of what's happening behind the scenes here, QuerySurge is querying the source and target system as defined in the query pair. It is loading all that source and target data into its bundled repository and taking it's offloading the analysis and the overhead associated with that analysis onto its own infrastructure and handling the analysis in against its own repository. All that information is stored in the QuerySurge repository for further analysis, with the option to either archive that data or delete it if it's not needed moving forward. If I toggle back over to the failing tab, you'll see that the mismatching data from the source and the target is stacked vertically for each row of mismatching data. And if I scroll over to the right here, you'll see that each individual piece of data was being compared, and the result here of the failing outcome was due to the card number column having mismatching data for these 7 rows. which is highlighted in the red column to the right. This is what's called our stack view. There's also what we refer to as a side-by-side view, which is the same data slightly represented from a slightly different perspective. All the mismatching source data is on the left in this view, and all the corresponding mismatching target data is on the right. And if I scroll over to the right to see exactly what data was mismatching, once again we'll be brought to the card number column with the mismatching data. One thing to note here from this view, all of this data can be exported from the QuerySurge repository. Whether you're interested in just the failing data and sharing that with your ETL developers or testers, you can export that data here to a variety of different formats. We support Excel, CSV, or XML. And you can also export the individual target or source data from here as well. If there was failing data and you would like to take a look at the source query or target query, we populate that information here as well. And this data will also be available in the Runtime Dashboard once we start scheduling a scenario execution. One thing to also point out here is that the history of all executions and all changes made to these query pairs are retained by the QuerySurge repository as well. So any changes that were made can be reviewed for analysis and revert back to a previous revision, as well as the design time run history of all the metadata associated with the execution within the design library. One piece of functionality I would also like to point out as well is what we refer to as a reusable query snippet. I just drilled down into another query pair, and you'll see here that there's a special syntax that once I hover over that keyword there, the source underscore count ordered by user, that reusable query snippet contains a subquery, or that can contain any piece of SQL for that matter, whether it's a common where clause, a parameter for substitution during execution, or any piece of SQL that needs to be parameterized or substituting here in a modular format. And the thought process here is that as your testing and development efforts continue on, your source and target queries will require potentially some modifications. And rather than having to make those modifications in a large amount of query pairs as your library grows over time, you can define those snippets of SQL or any type of logic or data for that matter in the form of a reusable query snippet. And rather than having to modify that data in 100 different places down the line, you can modify it in the reusable query snippet, and that change will propagate down to wherever that reusable query snippet is being used. This is the editor view right here. So you'll see the keyword syntax for reusable query snippet. And if I toggle over to the query view, you'll see the fully propagated SQL that will be executed by QuerySurge against your source and target connection. There are also a variety of different properties that can be defined for execution purposes and how failures should be handled for a specific query pair. Potentially, you may not be interested in certain types of failures that we present in the application, so there are a few different varieties of options that can control the outcome of the execution for an individual query pair, and also define the business keys that should be used for the analysis of the data. Once you've defined your query pairs, you can toggle over to the scheduler module by using either the dock icon on the bottom of the screen or the menu on the header bar up top. On the left side of the screen, you'll see a list of test suites, and a test suite is a basic concept in QuerySurge. It's a collection of query pairs for execution purposes that you can schedule through a variety of different workflows. So if I create a new test suite here, there's a few different ways that I can add query pairs to that new test suite. I can select them individually through the query pair library on the right and drag them into the middle pane, or I can select them on a folder level and drag the entire folder of query pairs into that specific test suite. Once I have my test suite saved, and this test suite may be created to categorize your query pairs for different use cases of execution. You may have a collection of test suites that is configured for regression purposes. You may have a test suite of query pairs that's configured for ongoing operational use to monitor the health of your different data warehouse and environment in your organization. So there's a lot of flexibility with how to organize and group your query pairs for execution. And once you have that defined, there's a few different ways to now execute those query pairs. The first method is to schedule what's called a scenario. And this is a configurable collection of test suites that you can schedule either by time or by event. A scenario can include one or more test suites. So there's flexibility with what data is being executed during the scenario execution. And the agent column refers to the component of the QuerySurge architecture that is actually firing off the queries against your source and target databases or data sources. You can have multiple agents running as part of your QuerySurge installation, and the role of the agent in that perspective is to increase your overall testing throughput and the amount of data and analysis that you're able to load into the QuerySurge repository at any given time. So you can overall decrease the amount of time testing, the amount of time needed and required to test your data, and ultimately increase the amount of coverage that you're testing as well. The default value here is to let any agent pick up a specific test suite, and these test suites can be scheduled individually for a specific date and time. So potentially, maybe you're looking to run a test suite off hours at 5 a.m. When there's no activity occurring within your environment. You can apply those settings on a test suite level, or you can apply them on the entire scenario level, and all those test suites will execute concurrently. And this is the example of the time-based execution. QuerySurge also has an API and a command line utility that can be used for event-driven execution purposes. So, for example, maybe you would like to integrate this process into your ETL processes running in your environment and have conditional workflow that's built into this execution model. So, for example, you can instruct QuerySurge via the API to execute a subset of your test suites or query pairs based upon events that are occurring in your environment. And that API and utility is included with the application as well. Once I have a scenario defined, I can either save that scenario for a future execution, or even from a simpler perspective, on a test suite level, I can simply select Run Now. And if I want to run an individual test suite, that's the way I can also do that from the scheduling module there. When you select Run Now on an individual test suite, that will toggle you over to the Runtime Dashboard. You'll see on the left is the list of activity and of scenarios that had previously occurred in the QuerySurge environment, or that are concurrently executing. All of this information and data is retained in the QuerySurge repository until a QuerySurge admin chooses to either archive it, export it, or delete that data. So for future analysis or for future initiatives that require a comparison of previously executed scenarios, all that data is retained by the QuerySurge repository. You'll see the upper center portion of your screen contains a list of the test suites that are part of this scenario. If I were to drill down into one of those specific test suites, you'll see a list of each query pair that was included in that test suite, and also the outcome of each individual query pair that was included in the suite. On the bottom portion of the screen, once you drill down to a specific query pair, there's a similar view as we saw in the design time runs, with the source and target data that was returned by the query pair, and all of the failing data as well. So the important thing to point out here is that QuerySurge is doing an analysis of each individual piece of data that is returned by those individual result sets. And all the analysis of that data is handled by QuerySurge, and the overhead associated with that is not impacting the performance of your data warehouse environment. In this specific example, there's a failed row count difference, and there's also an unmatched row, a non-matching row. that is defined here as well. You can once again see the source query and the target query that returned this data that was being displayed here for analysis. Just to review some of the exceptions and the errors that we capture. So we obviously capture any differences within the data itself, even if there is an equivalent amount of data being returned by the source and the target. We will also capture non-matching rows. So if there is a difference in the counts that are returned by the source and target, we'll identify those different non-matching rows with the yellow flag here. We'll see that the first column was defined as the primary key and the business key that was used to identify unique data from those result sets for the analysis. That's an option that the user has to define, and if it is left as default, QuerySurge will do its best to make the relationship and identify the data that should be compared from each corresponding connection. Some other types of exceptions and errors that QuerySurge will capture and display in the dashboard and the reporting. For example, if any type of SQL exception was generated throughout the execution process, we'll display that information here and flag that as an exception. This specific example had a syntax error and an exception was thrown by the Oracle database. So any exception that's captured will prevent an analysis from occurring, but we will provide the information for the exception that occurred. Another type of issue that we capture is any type of data type mismatches. So for example, if a specific column was defined as a data type and a corresponding column on the target was defined as a varchar, QuerySurge will identify that difference and capture it as a data type mismatch and display that information in the dashboard. I'm just going to toggle over to the design, the side-by-side view again. This is the example we had seen a bit earlier. So all data that is mismatching or failing data will be presented here in this view. Any data failure of this sort on the individual data level will be represented by the red flag, and this data can be filtered on in reporting for further analysis and for further manipulation of that data to really understand the root cause of the issues that are being experienced and being reported on. The bottom level of this screen is a graphical representation of the query execution throughout the scenario. As queries are fired off, excuse me, against the source and target databases, each individual query goes through a variety of different statuses, and all of that is documented here and maintained for analytical purposes and through reporting. If on the scenario 2 on the left, you can drill down into the individual scenarios that you're interested in, either to just display scenarios that are either occurring in your system right now or that have previously been executed against your environment. All the metrics for the specific scenario are displayed in the right portion of the screen in terms of the outcome for each individual query pair. And all this information that's available in real time and during the runtime of this specific scenario is also maintained as long as the administrator of the system chooses not to archive it or remove it. So if we toggle over to the reporting module, we'll take a look at some of the high-level reports that are available and also some more of the granular reports that we provide as well to get some familiarity with the data that we provide from a reporting perspective. Typically, the report that we like to start with is what we refer to as the scenario summary report. And the scenario summary report is meant for a high-level outcome view of a specific scenario. And you'll see here that for this specific execution, 20 query pairs were included in this scenario, 7 of which failed, 13 passed for a pass rate of 65%, which at first glance obviously doesn't seem like a very good outcome in terms of the health of your data. But more importantly, there's a good deal of more granular information that's also provided in the overview section. One of them being what we call the reliability ratio. And out of all the data that was compared in this specific scenario execution, there's approximately 6.5 million verifications that were performed in about 7 minutes. And just to give an idea of the size of this data, the size of this execution in terms of this space was about 200 gigabytes of data that was compared in our demo environment in about 7 minutes for about 6.5 million verifications. Out of all those 6.5 million verifications, approximately 96% of the data was coming back with the passing status. And out of that entire result set for the scenario, 227,000 of those were data failures. So there's lots of insightful information here in terms of how much data was analyzed, how long the analysis took for that specific set of data, and the reliability of the data that was compared by QuerySurge. A similar report that drills down into a bit more detail is the scenario detail report. If I run that report against the same scenario, you'll see that it starts off the exact same way that the scenario summary report is displayed, but also you're able to see a list of the test suite details, and more importantly, the results of every query pair on a query pair basis. So this scenario had approximately 20 query pairs, and you'll see the outcome and all the metrics associated with that execution in the scenario detail report here. The information displayed is the source row count, the target row count, and more importantly, any differences that were identified by QuerySurge during the analysis process. As time continues on, there may be a need to compare the results of scenarios as the different teams in your organization are building a more elaborate regression process around QuerySurge, and the application is used for an ongoing operational usage and health status of your organization. And some reporting that's available to really give some good insight into the health of the data and ongoing initiatives and efforts is the scenario comparison report. There's a variety of different filters that are available here, so you can drill down on an individual result set in terms of the data that you're interested in comparing. If I just execute this report here with some default filters, you'll see that all the high-level outcome information on a scenario level is available in this report. So as time continues on with this process, all the information can be compared to really see if progress is being made in terms of improving the quality of data in your organization, and to identify the health of ETL deployment and ongoing data initiatives and integration in your environment. One thing to also point out, and this is a new feature that we have recently added to really expand on the collaboration and the information that's provided by the tool, is that throughout this process of information that is being reported on by QuerySurge, there's also a customizable component that it can be found in the administration section to send out email notifications with a really specific set of rules depending on the criteria that you define. So as you've seen, there's a variety of different ways to execute a scenario or a query pair, either through the time-based execution or the event-triggered API command line that we have available as well. So to really automate this process, part of the challenge is also providing the information that's useful for your team on an ongoing basis. And there's email notifications and a framework here that can be used to define criteria of what constitutes a failing scenario and a passing scenario, and have different triggers sent out to the appropriate team members on your team accordingly throughout the life cycle and throughout the workflow of your scenario execution. One thing to also point out in the admin module here, there's a few different facilities to manage the information that's being loaded and maintained into the QuerySurge repository. So as time continues on, there's the option here from an admin perspective to either export, archive, or delete this information Depending on the business requirements of your organization, you may choose to retain all this data or to potentially export it from the system and archive it onto a shared network drive for auditing purposes. Or depending on the needs of the data analysis team, this data may need to be maintained in the system, and there's options for that, but there's also options to remove this data and understand exactly which data should be retained by the system and how much disk space it's maintaining and being allocated on the QuerySurge environment. One thing to also point out through the admin module is this is where you'll also create the users of your system and also the agents and the connections to your architecture. By clicking on the footer and then the rightmost icon there, what you can see is the agent activity of your system. And as we discussed a bit earlier, the agent is the mechanism of QuerySurge that's firing off your queries, and it really is enabling you to automate your entire process in terms of increasing the throughput of your testing and data coverage, and really decreasing overall the amount of time needed to accomplish your goals in terms of data coverage and to really have a really good understanding and insight into the health of your systems. So just to summarize the workflow of the application, users of the application will start off with the design library to create the test in the form of query pairs, schedule those query pairs for their specific business needs, be able to monitor the results of those query executions via the dashboard and the reporting module, and really use the admin module to really configure and customize the system to communicate information throughout the different teams of your organization and be able to report on the health of your data. I think that pretty much covers the workflow that I was hoping to cover today and communicate to everyone that was attending. I thank everyone for their time, and I'd like to turn it back over to Laura and Jeff Parsley for a Q&A session. And Laura and Jeff, you can take it from here.
Thanks, Gary. We'll now be opening up the floor for your questions, so we invite you to begin typing them into the chat window if you haven't already. I know we have a couple here. So the first one is what source and target database products are supported?
Thanks, Laura. QuerySurge in principle supports any JDBC-compliant database product or data source product, and that includes all of the standard technologies that are currently the big and prominent players in the data warehouse, data migration area. So we're talking about Oracle, we're talking about Netezza, we're talking about Teradata, we're talking about SQL Server. We'll include DB2 in there, and Sybase as well. And there's probably a couple others that I'm not thinking of, but I think those are all the big ones right now. Someone just waved me down and said, remember to say flat files as well. Just a word about flat files. We also support flat files. We handle those with a JDBC driver as well. And so we can handle your fixed width flat files. We can handle your delimited flat files in very much the same way that you handle a database table. Once you set up your flat file for querying within QuerySurge, you just write SQL against it, just as if you're writing against a database, and you're good to go. You can compare flat file data against database table data, flat file against flat file. Any combination is happy within QuerySurge.
Okay. The next question here is, are there any limitations on the size of the results that can be returned?
So QuerySurge does not limit you in any way in terms of data that you can be returned. The major limitation for what QuerySurge can handle really comes down to the hardware that you deploy it on. So if you deploy it with lots of resources, you'll be able to handle larger queries and retain those queries for longer, that data for longer. If you deploy it obviously on systems with lower levels of resources, then you'll be somewhat more limited. But QuerySurge by itself does not have any limitations built into it.
Okay. We have another question. Is the main use data migration?
So QuerySurge can be used for data migrations, absolutely. One of the nice aspects to this is if you're going from basically one system to another, where maybe it's an upgrade of one version of an application to another, and you're migrating between those two. So there is going to be some transformations. That's exactly like a leg of an ETL process. And so QuerySurge could be used for that kind of migration in exactly the same way as you use it on a data warehouse. So data warehouse testing is in scope. Data migration testing is in scope. There are a couple of other use cases that QuerySurge has been applied to. One of them that our customers actually came to us with is for use by their operations group. So there are a lot of operations teams out there that need to monitor data health on data warehouse systems. And some of our customers came to us and said, can you work with us to deploy this product to our operations team so they can run a set of pre-selected queries on an hourly basis, daily basis, and get reporting back to monitor the health of the data in the data warehouse. So operations teams can use can use QuerySurge for their data warehouses as well. In addition to that, folks have used QuerySurge just on their dev side. So QuerySurge has been implemented by some of our customers really as a unit testing tool, where developers will deploy internally on their system, on their development system, a build of their ETL code, and they'll push some data through it, and then they'll be able to run bulk data tests via QuerySurge on the data that their fresh, brand new ETL code is just pushed through to get a read on whether that is working out the way they expect it to look. So all of that is in scope. The last area where people use QuerySurge, and it's worthwhile to mention also, is for organizations that have approval processes. QuerySurge can be used by analysts to look at the work of the QA team and evaluate whether queries that have been advanced as testing all the different mappings in the data warehouse or in data migration do in fact appropriately test those mappings, and they can evaluate the actual queries that are in use, the data that's been returned from those queries to really confirm that the tests are working as expected. So they can use QuerySurge as part of their approvals process for the testing of an ETL system. That's especially important for organizations that may have downstream audits and need some real assets coming out of their approval process, so that they can show that a full procedure was followed in terms of creating the test, approving the test, executing the test, reviewing the results, and so forth.
Okay, the next question is, does it record the runtime of the query pair or just the individual query in the query pair?
That's a great question. Someone was paying attention to the pages as they passed. Thank you. QuerySurge records the time. It traps the time of all events, so to speak, that go on. So QuerySurge will capture the timing for returning each of your queries. It will also capture its own runtimes. Remember, QuerySurge is not only issuing the queries, it's getting the data back, and it is analyzing that data. So it'll give you information about how long the run takes, but it'll also give you information about how long each of your queries took to give you a picture of how your source and your target databases are behaving.
Okay. In complex data warehouse environments, isn't writing query pairs like redesigning your ETL with complex and almost unmaintainable queries?
That's also a great question, and one we always like to have, so thank you for that as well. And you are reflecting something that is a real aspect of the process, but let me rephrase the situation that you described from our perspective, which is that from a QA perspective, really the brass ring is having a talented and skilled QA team look at the same spec as your talented and skilled development team is looking at, and devise tests based on that spec. And otherwise, there's no real check on the work of what the developers are able to do. Everyone makes mistakes, and so by having an independent team look at, and independent eyes look at the same spec produce queries to test based on that spec, that's really the only way that you have any chance of getting some serious quality issues out of the way before you deploy to production. And in our experience of implementing this in this fashion, a number of interesting things have occurred. First of all, certainly defects in the ETL code have been discovered on many occasions, of course, and that gives a quick read back to the development team to correct those issues and refine the code so that the build is working according to spec. Obviously, in addition to that, QA people are human just like developers are human. On many cases, we've discovered that what we thought was a result indicating a defect actually was a result indicating a defect in the test. So that has allowed the QA team to refine its tests better. But something even more interesting has happened. On numerous occasions, when a test failed and developers and QA folks got together to compare results, they looked at the spec and realized that they'd read the spec differently, that the mapping was phrased in such a way that it could be interpreted in different ways, and that they each could see how the other had read the mapping document. And when that, in some cases, when that question was brought back to the business analyst who wrote the document, in fact, the business analyst realized that there were some cases that were unhandled and had to go back to the business and actually find out what the rules were supposed to be. So all of that allows you to get mileage out of QuerySurge in terms of determining where issues really lie. Are they data issues? Are they issues in the test? Or perhaps they're actual issues in the spec? And the more of that discovery that can be done during the build process, during the development cycle, before you get to production, obviously the cheaper it is going to be to fix defects of all sorts, of all these different sorts, and the better off you're going to be in terms of the quality of your deployment to production. So yes, it is a burden to write testing queries. They do have to be written by people who are skilled in the tool, but that is the path that is going to get you to the highest quality data flowing through your data warehouse or your data migration once you get into production.
Okay, next question is writing queries. Do we have to follow different syntaxes due to compatibility with different types of databases?
QuerySurge doesn't impose any syntactic requirements on you, meaning if you have, say, a Teradata database on your source side and maybe an Oracle database on your target side, you are free to use all of the non-ANSI as well as the ANSI compliant SQL syntax that is available for both of those products or for any of the products that you happen to be working with. The only burden, so to speak, that is on you in terms of writing a query pair is that you have to bring the data back in a logically related structure, meaning the way the data has to come back, it has to look the same on both source and target. If there is any transformation logic that occurs between those two source and target points, those two ETL legs, then you do have to supply that in your SQL. And that's the magic that really makes the sort of high quality test work in QuerySurge. You can do your transformation, bring back the data in a consistent format from any point in the data warehouse architecture to and compare it to any other point in the data warehouse architecture. And that's how you get to the high quality that you're looking for. Obviously, the other point about QuerySurge is that it allows you to do this in bulk so that you're not just doing this for a fraction of a percent of your data, but you're doing it for a large percent of your data, whether that's 10% of your data, 20% of your data, 50% of your data, or higher. That, of course, is up to you and the constraints that your project operates on. And in our practice, I would say for kind of an average everyday run, we're probably in the 25% range, and for full regression runs, we're probably in the 40 to 50% range. On a couple of rare occasions, we have been tasked to verify all of the data coming back from a particular source, and so we have done that. That is to say, we've been able to do 100% of the data coming out of the source into a data warehouse in those occasions where that was required. So you can go as high as you need to go in terms of the sample size that you work with in QuerySurge, and the higher you can go, of course, the better off you're going to be.
Okay. Next question we have is, can the source target connections be parameterized or assigned as variables so that we need not set them manually for each test case?
The way QuerySurge is designed, you need a source and a target assigned for each individual query pair. All you have to do is set up all of the different connections that you need in the administration area of QuerySurge, and you're good to go. So it is something that you do have to set for each query pair. It's not a parameter in that sense.
Okay, so next question is, so QuerySurge is an audit and data quality tool rather than a test-driven development aid for ETL development.
Well, that's partly right. It can be used in those modes, if you will, but it is absolutely designed as a quality tool for ETL data. And really, that's the point where QuerySurge started. It came to those other uses as people started to use it in their environments. So the core design of QuerySurge emerged from using QuerySurge as a quality tool for verifying data in bulk for data warehouse, data migration, and so forth. Downstream, people realized they could use it for operations monitoring, for various other sorts of purposes as well, as your question illustrates.
Okay, next question is, how am I able to get a QuerySurge download or trial?
We have two options for you in that regard. One is you can go to QuerySurge.com website, and you can request to use a sandbox. We've got sandboxes set up for users to play with QuerySurge in with our data set up for you to run some queries and build some queries of your own and see how QuerySurge works. If you want to try it out in your own environment, then there's a free trial download on our website as well, and you're welcome to download it and install it. And please get in contact with us if you've got any questions about it, and we'll be more than happy to engage with you on that.
The next question is, how many agents can we use with QuerySurge?
QuerySurge, as Ray mentioned, works off sort of a tripartite architecture, meaning it's got an app server and a database, but it's also got an agent. The agents are the portion of QuerySurge that actually execute the queries and return the results into QuerySurge. You can deploy as many agents as you'd like to in your environment. One of the things that the agents can do is actually issue queries on threads. The agents are multi-threaded, so that each agent can handle and manage multiple queries at the same time. On top of that, you can have multiple agents running multiple queries simultaneously in your environment. The whole point of this is to allow you to bulk up the number of queries you're putting through per unit time. When we do this with customers that we work with, usually we hit a point where their source and target databases can no longer efficiently execute the load that QuerySurge is putting on them, so that you get to a sort of a point of no return. So you want to deploy only enough agents running enough threads to give you maximum throughput. Beyond that, of course, you don't really get any advantage, and you may have some disadvantage.
All right, so that looks like all of the questions that we have for today's session. So that wraps up our Q&A session, and thank you for your time and participation today. I'll be sending a follow-up email to everyone with our contact information in case you have any questions, and the links to the presentation recording once it becomes available. So let us know if you have any additional questions. Thanks again, and have a great day.